Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I'd like to welcome all of our attendees and our workgroup chairs of the blockchain workgroup, Mr. Doug Rice and Andrew Sanders, who are joined by fellow workgroup member and contributor to the Blockchain for Hospitality white paper, which is available on htng.org. So would our workgroup chairs, Andrew, would you please introduce today's presenter for this webinar on blockchain and loyalty use cases?
Certainly, thank you, Armand, and good morning, everyone. We're delighted to welcome two entrepreneurs as our presenters today on this topic of blockchain and the loyalty use case, both of whom are joining us from Spain. Firstly, Chuck Ehredt, who co-founded Currency Alliance just over 3 years ago, which is a cloud-based loyalty currency management platform. And as Amanda said, Chuck has been greatly involved in the development of the HTNG white paper on blockchain over the past year, and we certainly appreciate all of his contributions. And also Juan Miguel Perez, who's the co-founder of Finboot, which is a developer of blockchain applications for corporate use. Juan has been instrumental in blockchain development for disruptive and enabling technologies also for about 3 years. So thank you, gentlemen, for preparing this webinar, and I'll pass over now to Chuck.
Well, thank you, Andrew. This is Chuck Ehredt, and about 4 years ago, when we were designing the Currency Alliance platform to enable rapid and low-cost connectivity between partners in a loyalty coalition environment, our team evaluated whether blockchain could provide the base infrastructure to meet our business and technology objectives. We ended up rejecting blockchain at that time for 4 specific reasons, and 3 of which I think still remain significant constraints. However, we continuously reevaluate the evolution of blockchain because we believe that it could totally disintermediate our own service over the next 8 to 12 years. At the periphery of our core platform, we've been using blockchain in a number of ways for the past 2 years, and we'll continue to experiment given the probable magnitude of impact this technology will have on our business and society over the next 2 to 20 years. As mentioned, I'm joined today by Juan Miguel Perez from Finboot. Juan is one of the co-founders of Finboot, which has developed the Marco platform on blockchain, and they are Currency Alliance's blockchain infrastructure partner. Together, we just delivered a blockchain project for a major global travel organization, which has also helped us refine our beliefs on how this technology is likely to be deployed by travel brands with loyalty programs. In terms of the agenda for today, for those of you who are attending but have not seen any of the prior Blockchain for Hospitality webinars or read the HTNG white paper on Blockchain for Hospitality, I highly recommend reviewing them. They're very comprehensive and I think quite fair assessments of the state of blockchain technology and quite insightful about how blockchain may be embraced by the hospitality industry. It's building on those resources will reiterate some of the key characteristics of blockchain that are relevant in the context of loyalty programs without reiterating a lot of the detailed explanations provided in these previous webinars. We'll then cover the advantages and disadvantages of blockchain in the context of loyalty programs, and then go into 13 specific loyalty use cases for blockchain before providing a bit of a deeper dive on adoption considerations for blockchain by enterprises and a specific example of how blockchain would be used to support a redemption transaction. And finally, we'll stick our neck out with some predictions and recommendations based on the current state of the technology and various ecosystems that are rapidly evolving. This is quite an ambitious agenda for a 1-hour webinar, so with luck, we'll still have 15 or 20 minutes left for questions and answers. So with no further ado, let's get started. Today's webinar is focused on the blockchain technology and not on cryptocurrencies, which can be enabled with blockchain like Bitcoin, Ether, or Litecoin. There are about a dozen loyalty tokens that I'm aware of, which have been created by entrepreneurs, but so far none of them have yet gained any critical mass or industry adoption. Blockchain technology has a number of common characteristics, but there is not one blockchain. In fact, there are already tens of thousands of blockchains, most of which are incompatible with each other. Public blockchains are just that, public. Anyone can access them, write transactions to them, mine blocks, etc. Most of the existing loyalty tokens are operating on public blockchains. However, I do not believe the majority of loyalty programs will use public blockchains to support their business. Therefore, the majority of comments in this webinar are made in the context of a private blockchain, which could be run by a single company, or a consortium of companies that agree to collaborate to operate a single blockchain. In a private or consortium blockchain, each entity that accesses the blockchain must be granted permission, which allows a greater degree of capability to protect data, limit partnerships, and configure other characteristics of collaboration. Blockchains benefiting from multi-node consensus are distributed over a network by definition, with a primary objective that no one company or node is in control of the blockchain itself. If no one is in control, trust is introduced precisely because no one is in control, and each node verifies that historical transactions have not been tampered with. It's very important to recognize that data recorded in a blockchain is visible to all authorized parties. This is great for building trust based on transparency, conducting an audit, or verifying certainty of information. But most organizations running a loyalty program would not want the majority of their data to be visible beyond their own organization. Furthermore, data cannot be changed without all parties knowing. The blockchain algorithm responsible for creating new blocks will reject any version of the blockchain that has been tampered with, even by changing a single byte. Perhaps the good news is that we've been overwhelmed with hype during the past 2 to 3 years, which has helped us learn a lot about the technology, but also introduced a lot of confusion and issues that may or may not be relevant for our business. I actually believe we're now nearing the end of the hype cycle, which will allow each of us to get on with our own business goals and objectives. So in terms of some broad benefits available from blockchain, smart contracts are basically just programs written to execute on a blockchain, and they cannot be tampered with without other authorized parties knowing. For routine transactions, or even infrequent transactions depending on a specific event or series of events, this is a very powerful capability that can reduce cost and ensure compliance with the defined criteria and accepted variables defined in the smart contract. For example, a smart contract could be established to give a customer a 1,000-point bonus after every 5 bookings on your direct channel. Smart contracts allow organizations to push application layer logic into the blockchain network and out of legacy systems. Given that maintaining smart contracts may be much less expensive than maintaining legacy loyalty program management systems. However, errors or logic that is not compliant with the business objectives that get programmed into smart contracts will also be executed. So it's important to ensure smart contracts are defined correctly and tested thoroughly to avoid unexpected consequences, which are often difficult to undo. Connectivity between partners also can be greatly simplified. If each entity only needs a single connection to the blockchain, we avoid a large number of point-to-point integrations between trading partners in the loyalty program coalition. This could potentially remove the IT department being a bottleneck in adding partners into loyalty coalitions. Authorization or user permissions to access the blockchain can be based on specific certificates associated with the blockchain. But it's also possible that authorized users within an approved organization can access the blockchain with their corporate credentials. Such authorization could also be across multiple blockchains. Once a blockchain has been established with smart contracts that can apply many of the business rules, it's possible that IT involvement could be reduced, since non-technical people could enable or configure the smart contracts to achieve a new partnership, create or change loyalty rules, or manage the permissions of many users. With all data being tamper-proof and fully visible, the use of smart contracts as an automated agent to run a batch process could enable routine activities such as reconciliation and settlement to be performed in a much more streamlined and cost-effective manner. Many loyalty programs are operated by administrative third-party organizations, which has its associated cost. These third parties are often relied on due to their subject matter expertise or to objectively look after the best interests of multiple parties. Blockchain configured correctly could take over much of this work, driving costs out of the business. Blockchain transactions are processed every 10 minutes in the Bitcoin blockchain, but in near real time on many other blockchains. Transactions between partners could be automated to the degree that customers get their points in a hotel program within minutes after settling their rental car invoice. By easily adding more partners that issue your loyalty currency, the customer could earn from many more places they shop, and selling points to more partners in itself can be quite profitable while generating greater customer engagement and velocity of earning that builds stickiness to the loyalty program. We'll talk about exchange and redemptions in a moment, but blockchain offers the promise to deliver new tools to proactively manage program liability. So switching to some concerns or disadvantages of blockchain in the context of loyalty, as mentioned, errors in transactions or smart contracts will remain in the blockchain forever. They can be corrected only with new smart contracts or adjusting transactions. Many companies could be connected to the same blockchain, and some of them could be competitors. Therefore, brands will have to be careful how their program and their currency can be used by smart contracts, or brands could actually lose the degree of control that they've become accustomed to over the last couple decades. Most brands would not want a customer to spend their loyalty currency with a competitor, at least not at its full economic value. And with many entities coexisting in a common transactional environment, there'll certainly be new forms of fraud that we'll need to identify and manage. What is most probable is that the desired partners in a loyalty program will be using various blockchains in their businesses. As an industry, we'll have to find ways for smart contracts to operate across multiple blockchains, or a type of blockchain bridge will need to be created. In fact, it's highly likely that most brands will actually use multiple blockchains. So we need to be conscious how we design our requirements to maximize the probability that they can be enabled. It's unlikely that governments will regulate blockchain themselves, especially private or consortium blockchains, but they are already regulating cryptocurrencies. If a brand converted their loyalty points or miles into a crypto token, they would become regulated entities in many different countries and required to comply with laws that could vary widely from country to country. Loyalty programs need to decide if they want all their data to be immutable and fully transparent. I would argue that most do not like this. At a minimum, where GDPR exists, personally identifiable information cannot be made visible in a blockchain. Furthermore, do we want our data to be distributed or exposed to cross-border transfers that may violate current laws or laws that may come into effect in the future? And of course, if we are to become dependent on a particular blockchain operated by partners who may evolve to have competing priorities or simply cease to exist, we could possibly get exposed to a catastrophic situation where much of our data has been recorded in a blockchain and then that blockchain ceases to exist. So if we now switch to the loyalty use cases, we've identified 13 use cases for loyalty. Most of these are technologically feasible today, but only 3 to 4 are economically reasonable today, at least in my opinion. User authentication extends well beyond loyalty, but blockchain can be used to authenticate specific individuals as loyalty program members, as well as business users representing an enterprise. The user profile can include permissions or restrictions to accurately grant access to data, share data, create transactions, etc. Loyalty rules for earning points or miles can be encoded in smart contracts, which allows us to push the logic out of legacy systems and into the blockchain network. Because blockchain is distributed by nature, this can greatly enhance the scalability of programs, adding partnerships, and promoting engagement opportunities with members of the loyalty program. Similarly, loyalty currency redemptions can also be automated with smart contracts. Whether all steps in the redemption transaction can take place in the blockchain depends on whether the main points bank is on the blockchain itself, or whether a host system needs to be consulted for a member's points balance prior to permitting the transaction. Enabling loyalty currency exchange is perhaps one of the most obvious opportunities, but it is likely to be enabled in a hybrid blockchain and legacy system environment, since it's unlikely that most loyalty programs will be using blockchain as their main points bank anytime soon. However, the scalability of exchange using smart contracts to set exchange rates between approved exchange partners offers the promise of giving customers much more freedom to put their loyalty currency value towards something that is valuable to them, making the points and miles more motivating to collect in the first place. Creating dynamic packages where multiple services are combined into a single redemption package is a very interesting use case, because smart contracts could dynamically create packages with an airport transfer, a flight, hotel reservations, and other services or products based on a customer's preferences, current market demand, actual currency exchange rates on that particular day, and offer that for a specific number of points or miles based on the customer's unique profile, possibly across multiple loyalty programs. And the cost or price in points could be held in escrow until confirmation was received that each service was used before the funds are actually distributed to the various suppliers. Another type of redemption option that could be made available via smart contracts and blockchain is the opportunity to convert or exchange the value of points into a gift card or voucher. The gift card value could be assigned to a unique individual, or it could be configured to enable that value to be transferred between individuals or restricted from being transferred. And point of sale systems or booking funnels could interact with the blockchain to accept payment, presuming there was sufficient value existing on that particular gift card or voucher to avoid the risk of double spending. As mentioned, blockchains can be used as a distributed database to store value. So smart contracts could be enabled to hold funds until a triggering event before they release that value to a supplier providing a service. Similarly, smart contracts can periodically reconcile accounts between loyalty program partners and automate the settlement process. There are many cases today where one supplier, such as Avis Budget or Hertz Rent-A-Car, are willing to match the loyalty tier status of a partner's program. A member status in one or many programs could be maintained in a blockchain and exposed to approved partners. Of course, this is a tricky situation because one hotel group is not going to want to broadcast the names of their most frequent guests to competitors. Wholesale transactions, such as United Airlines selling billions of mileage plus miles to Chase Bank, could be completed on the blockchain. Or if IHG had received many American Airlines Advantage miles via various redemptions, they could trade them back to American Airlines via a wholesale transaction. And customers are increasingly like to use online tools to take care of themselves rather than call a customer service center and possibly wait 20 minutes on hold to get through to a real person. We can imagine many services provided through call centers, websites, or apps could be automated with blockchain involved in orchestrating the desired outcome in the background. In fact, blockchain should almost always be in the background, kind of like a database, where the customer has no idea what stack of technology is actually meeting their needs. Blockchain has a number of data security features which can help with GDPR compliance. However, the inability to delete data and the transparency of content recorded to a blockchain would violate the law in many respects. Therefore, organizations considering blockchain for loyalty applications will need to consider how to store some of the data off-chain, but possibly make it accessible to authorized users via the blockchain. Blockchain is a chain of blocks containing individual transactions that cannot be altered. Therefore, it forms an excellent potential audit tool. This may be useful if all similar types of transactions are recorded on the same blockchain, since supporting some transactions on the blockchain and others in a legacy system might actually make the audit process more complicated or expensive. And our 13th and final loyalty use case is not unique to loyalty, but can be highly relevant to some earning and redemption products or services. A loyalty program could encode in a smart contract that points can be earned only on purchases of products that are certified to be authentic, such as avoiding issuing points when someone buys a fake or a replica. Or a customer may want to be certain their redemption is for a product or service that did not involve child labor or come from a country supporting terrorism. Providing access to product information about its source and route to market may be relevant in some situations. In all, we've identified 13 use cases for loyalty transactions on blockchain, but there certainly are many permutations of each of these. My colleague, Juan Miguel Perez, will now walk us through the data flow of a redemption transaction involving a legacy system interoperating with a blockchain, as well as set a little context for how blockchain can enable adoption of the right blockchain to meet your business objectives.
Hello, everyone. This is Juan. So yes, like Chuck said, what I want to do is sort of take a moment to give a closer look into one specific use case of blockchain for loyalty, which is a redemption process in a multi-partner ecosystem, right? Now, before we get into that level of detail, I do want to give a bit of an overview of what blockchain technology or distributed ledger technology could mean for the loyalty sector, particularly what blockchain essential features are and what are those sort of added elements or added features that are not necessarily essential to blockchain. So any distributed ledger, blockchain being a type of them, has these four essential features, right? They have an access model, which basically allows the participants to read or write information. They have the data storage model that basically allows that information to be contained in those blocks or databases, interconnected databases of the ledger. It's got a consensus algorithm that it's sort of the decision maker of what information is going to make it to the shared ledger. And particularly, and perhaps one of the most interesting elements, is that application logic that we can have in these ledgers, right? So we've got information, we've got a way to access that information, a way to decide how to write or what to write in this information, or what information to write, and that application logic that is basically how can we automate processes with the data that we now share. So essentially, this is what comes in that little or overall block that blockchain is, right? Now, there are some elements that are not essential for blockchain technology, and that particularly for the loyalty sector, we might want to have. Chuck, if you can go forward.
Yeah.
Right.
My screen's actually frozen, so I'm going to stop the share for a moment and start again. Sorry about that.
Again, particularly, we've got this combination of essential features that come into a box, usually open source, and I'll give more insight into that. But we've got some non-essential features that might be interesting for the loyalty sector. Some of them are anonymity, privacy, and confidentiality. Now, probably going differently than what you might have heard, these three elements are not essential to blockchain technology. And this is probably the most important thing I want to get through today, because it's often misunderstood that you could have anonymity, privacy, and confidentiality by default in a blockchain environment, which it is not the case. Now, you can add these elements or a section of them to a blockchain ecosystem by using strong encryption, or by using what we call selective disclosure, right? Which is just basically, we add on some features, we add on some implementation into our distributed network, and it's now sort of a distributed network with an ad hoc functionality. Now, in terms of the loyalty sector, I think the most important thing is to choose the right one, right? Like Chuck said at the beginning, we've got thousands of distributed ledgers. What we need to focus is on which of these features do we need for loyalty applications. Now, I've selected a few of them, and of course, there is a balance on this in the sense that some particular use cases of the ones we've just heard might need a stronger input in some of these features, or they might have a necessity to do a sort of another add-on feature that we might want to implement. But in general, our vision is that loyalty applications built on blockchain, they will need some application logic, these so-called smart contracts, that basically what allows is to clear up or to automate back office procedures, right? So it's just how all this process in loyalty of how we earn, burn, redeem points, these are just logical steps that are now part of the burden of a back office to go through them and make sure that the whole system is operational. Blockchain technology could allow for multiple parties to migrate that logic into the smart contract. Now, and I'll repeat this, even though Chuck has already commented on it, but it is probably also a relevant point, is the fact that for loyalty applications, what we envision is private implementations of distributed ledger technologies or consortiums, right? And the idea behind this is that basically for practical reasons, we do not want to have loyalty points or loyalty points transactions in public ledgers, right? Another element that sort of is tied up to the private implementation is the fact that partners will want to have control over who joins the network. So you've got an ecosystem that hopefully will continue to grow over the next years as more players join different implementations, but the pre-existing or the founding or the authority partners, they will want to have control over who gets to join their network. Now there's another feature which is a little bit technical, which is a balance in scalability, security, and decentralization. This is something within the sector often called as the blockchain trilemma. And the point behind this is that you sort of, in a distributed ledger technology, you need to choose 2 out of these 3, or you need to be strong in 2 out of these 3. And it's because for how blockchain protocols work, you can assure that you're very strong in 2 of these elements, but that implies a level of weakness on the 3rd one. So for instance, and for that I'll use some of the examples of distributed ledger technologies that are out there. We can have Ethereum. These are some of the open standards, right? So we can have Ethereum, a private implementation of Ethereum, just to be clear, which is a very secure and very decentralized network, but it's got some issues on scaling. Whereas Hyperledger and Quorum, for instance, Hyperledger Fabric and Quorum are implementations that have addressed scalability. They continue to be highly secure, but then they are sort of a bit more weak on decentralization, right? To understand the conflict between scalability and decentralization, it's quite simple in the sense that decentralization is sort of that factor of distribution, number of nodes, how far apart are they, how lost among them is their control. Whereas the scalability is how fast can you grow this network, how fast can you have more players into it. And evidently these are 2 that sort of go against each other. Now the security plays a role in both of them in the sense that decentralization weakens security if you've got more players in it, and scalability also weakens security if you've got a bigger ecosystem to control, right? So you need to find a balance for your particular application of what are the elements that we need to sort of be stronger at, and what are other elements on this DLT that we can perhaps be more flexible on implementation. Now, what we've done is, apart from sort of doing that whole analysis of, okay, this is what blockchain is. Hi, Andrew, sorry. This is what blockchain is, what it isn't, and what it could do, is that we've managed to find a way to accelerate the adoption of blockchain in enterprises, right? So particularly at Finboot, we've built what we call the Marco platform, which is basically a solution that takes out the complexity of this technology, right? And it allows to bring these solutions to the desk of every employee. So like we say here, this loyalty hexagon that we place in the image, it represents a loyalty program, or the manager of a loyalty program. And what we do is we bring those tools and those features of blockchain technology to that user in a sort of easy to approach, easy to implement type of way. And to go to be more clear on what that acceleration means, what I'll do is I'll go into that example of redemption points in a blockchain ecosystem, right? So what we have done in partnership with Currency Alliance is we've managed to create a reconciliation system for a multiplayer loyalty program, right? So you've got different enterprises that want to share a redemption process of their points, but they want to make sure that the reconciliation of every transaction that is performed in each enterprise or by each service, it's then reconciled and can be used to settle their commercial agreements afterward, right? So we will use the example of Richard booking a hotel with points from an airline loyalty program, right? What we have done is we've built what we call the frequent flyer program application, which is that access level, that simplified access level into the whole blockchain ecosystem, right? So this is a web application that communicates to the booking facilities. It communicates to points banks to check balance and take the money from the accounts. And it communicates to the settlement systems to effectively turn these reconciliations into payments, right? And we've also developed what we call a console, which again, it's also a web application, so it's quite easy to interact with it. from which we allow the different partners to deploy new partnerships. So this means this hotel could enter a new partnership with another airline, or they could update the terms of their existing partnership, right? So that means they want to make a change in the agreement the hotel and the airline have, right? And basically what this is, in terms of blockchain lingo, is a smart contract management, right? Now, in the blockchain ecosystem, to explain what we've got in this blank box, I'll just go through this example. So we've created 3 different smart contracts, right? The first one I'll go through is the master index, right? The master index is a register of every partnership in this ecosystem, right? So when we go from the frequent flyer program application and we get that message of Richard wanting to book a hotel with the airline points, the first entry point is to that master index smart contract, which what it does is, let me check if actually airline A and hotel Z do have a partnership, right? Now this has an address, so that alphanumeric string of characters there is an address to the smart contract of the partnership itself. So on that smart contract of the partnership, what we have is information like we place here, where we say that one airline one airline A point in this example, is worth 0.1 dollar cents at Hotel Z. So once this information is checked, what the frequent flyer app does is it communicates to the points bank, and it says, well, take out the balance or take out this number of points for the particular room reservation, and bring me back the okay that you've actually completed the transaction from the booking facility, so that I can reconcile it in the blockchain ecosystem, right? So the reconciliation smart contract in the blockchain ecosystem, what it does is it creates a debtor-creditor relationship, and it records that information with a particular transaction ID. So when we look at, again, what this alphanumeric string of characters look like, is a message to the settlement systems, right? And it is actually a message that comes in the form of an XML file, which these applications already use, right? So this is a little bit the somehow easier to read information of that reconciliation report, right? So it tells you what service was provided by the hotel, the price in euros for that service, who the debtor and creditors are in this reconciliation. It's got a transaction ID to the points bank that is linked to the points bank, in this case, the Currency Alliance points bank, of the player or the stakeholder. And it's got that transaction hash, which is basically where on our distributed ledger we have recorded this information with a given timestamp, and that a relationship between amounts in fiat currency and number of points. Now, this is just basically that overview of how one of these applications could play around in the blockchain ecosystem. I'll let Chuck continue with a little bit of what the predictions are for future applications.
Yeah, thank you, Juan. In fact, in February 2019, so basically in 2 months, Juan and I are intending to do a much deeper dive on loyalty use cases using blockchain, and actually provide demo of several specific use cases in operation. So hopefully people will pay attention when the announcement for that webinar comes out, and you'll join us again. Predicting anything related to blockchain is a challenge because there's so much innovation taking place, and we have the backdrop of many people and organizations promoting their own agendas. However, we feel we're nearing the end of the hype cycle, and the massive proliferation of methods to accomplish business objectives with blockchain will begin to consolidate around best practices and accepted standards. In terms of sticking our necks out, we believe very few traditional loyalty currencies will be converted into cryptocurrencies, in large part, as I mentioned, because travel and retailing brands will not want to become regulated entities in many different countries, because their loyalty currency would be treated like a form of money and therefore a regulated asset. However, there is also the risk of losing control over the value of a brand's loyalty currency. Normally, the value of a cryptocurrency is determined by supply and demand. If demand drops, the value usually declines, which would reflect badly on the brand, but also produce problems for their balance sheet. There are ways of maintaining price stability for a loyalty currency, but that's beyond the scope of today's discussion. I think it is logical that 6 to 10 or 20 or even 50 hotel groups could create a blockchain consortium to operate a blockchain related to loyalty in the hospitality industry, where competitors recognize the sharing of cost and keeping each other honest outweighs the disadvantages of maintaining dozens of disparate systems, especially since there is considerable collaboration with airlines and rental car partners. Such a blockchain with a limited number of brands operating mining nodes would permit the electricity costs and development costs to be low enough that the cost per transaction processed on the blockchain could be below 1 US cent. Then, of course, we have the issue of who you can do business with via blockchain. If few of your natural trading partners have embraced the technology, or even on the same blockchain, we anticipate that it will still be 2 to 3 years before a minimum critical mass of organizations are using compatible blockchain services for loyalty applications to enable meaningful services for customers. No one seems to want to be first. However, we may find in the next year or two that 5 to 10 natural trading partners all agree to embrace blockchain at about the same time, which would then generate network effects to bring additional partners on board. As mentioned, it's unrealistic to believe that all business partners will choose to be on the same blockchain ecosystem. So we need to prepare for not only a hybrid environment of blockchain and legacy systems, but also a situation where transactions, smart contracts, and user authentication functions are blockchain agnostic and therefore operate across multiple chains. We can demonstrate this today, but much more work is required to make applications operate with less dependency on a specific blockchain. And finally, I feel like much of what we've shared with you today is now widely understood by executives across the loyalty programs we talk to. And I've noticed that these executives seem comfortable postponing any aggressive investment in the technology until real benefits can be realized, which depends mostly on a little bit more development of the infrastructure itself, especially around smart contract functionality, and then gaining a critical mass of partners to actually do business with. In terms of recommendations and next steps, I believe blockchain is a very transformative technology that will have a massive impact on business and society over the next 2 to 20 years. Obviously, there's already considerable impact with cryptocurrencies, and some enterprises are using the technology for very specific reasons, like trading of financial instruments or supply chain management. But given the potential impact, it's never too early to start learning or keep learning. You will also have to decide soon whether to build the blockchain skills in-house or find one or more partners to provide services. I believe there's no right or wrong answer to this, but given the financial implications, at a minimum, you'll need to have sufficient skills in-house to select and manage vendors. I've been to a few conferences recently where the sessions on blockchain were downright misleading. But on a whole, I think attending conferences is a good way to learn quickly, stay abreast of industry advances, and network with others who are also trying to find their way into a world where blockchain will be prevalent. The beauty of blockchain, in my opinion, is the opportunity to collaborate with partners at lower cost in order to better serve customers. So talking with existing partners or potential partners about their intentions with blockchain will help with short-term, medium-term, and long-term planning. In fact, I was recently invited to a meeting of the heads of loyalty for all the Star Alliance airline members. And one of the questions posed was, okay, we feel like we understand blockchain, but when will be the defining moment when we should embrace blockchain and proceed? And my response was, when there's a minimum number of natural trading partners also planning to migrate onto blockchain, that's when you should prepare to advance. And it's unlikely that that will be in 2019. It might be in 2020, but my instinct, having watched a number of technology transformations over the last 30 years, is that we probably won't get to a point where there's critical mass until about 2021 or 2022. So over the past year, it's been really interesting to see blockchain applications for loyalty come to life. And we expect to provide a much more detailed webinar in February 2019 to dive into some of these use cases in greater detail, explaining the methods for setting up smart contracts, how they can interact with the blockchain, as well as the business decisions that must be made to determine how best to put blockchain to productive use. We hope you'll join us for that. And with that, Armand, I'd like to turn it back to you, and we'll answer any questions in the remaining 10 minutes.
Great. Chuck and Juan, that was a great explanation of how blockchain solves some of the issues, as well as provides some unique benefits for loyalty points in the travel and hospitality industries. And we appreciate your approach to this topic and making it an unbiased presentation as much as possible, understanding that there are many different viewpoints when talking about blockchain. We have a few minutes for questions. Again, please direct those questions to me in the chat window, and I'll ask them of our presenters. One question we have, Chuck, I think you said at the very beginning that Currency Alliance chose not to build its platform on blockchain 4 years ago for 4 specific reasons. What were they, and how have things changed since then?
Yeah, so that's actually a good question, because we did a really deep analysis on various blockchains and how they could support our business at that time. And we basically came to the conclusion that we were actually entering the hype cycle of blockchain 4 years ago, and that there would be this massive proliferation of standards and innovation. And if we embraced blockchain as our core infrastructure, we probably would spend more time maintaining our platform to keep it running as the underlying infrastructure was changing and evolving through hard forks, and therefore much more focus on maintenance than advancing the development of our platform. And so it was one of the reasons was largely related to the stability. The second issue was private blockchains were very, very new 4 years ago, and we felt like we could control the cost in a private environment, but in a public environment, the cost per transaction varied a lot. And most loyalty currency transactions are someone earning 20 or 30 cents worth of value. And you can't be paying 10 or 15 cents in blockchain transaction costs to process a 30-cent transaction. It just doesn't make economic sense. So we were concerned about the cost issues. And then most loyalty programs operate based on application layer logic. You know, what are the rules for earning or redemption or exchange? And smart contracts were still very, very immature 4 years ago. And so that was a concern of ours. And then the biggest issue was that even if we embraced blockchain as our infrastructure, if there was nobody else using blockchain, then we'd be out there all by ourselves. There was just nobody to do business with. And so anyway, we continue to revisit each of those issues on a regular basis. And before I laid out what we thought the 13 use cases were for loyalty, I said that all of those use cases are technically feasible today. Maybe only half of them were technically feasible 4 years ago, but only a few of them are economically feasible, just because transaction costs or development costs are still a bit too high. So, you know, time, I think, will be our friend in this context.
Yeah, very interesting, and even more interesting that you had the foresight, you know, so many years ago to consider blockchain. And how quickly it's progressed in just the last few years. I you know, very very impressive that you guys had that foresight back then. I think many people on this call barely even knew what blockchain was beyond cryptocurrency, even if that long ago. So another question is, how would a group of hotels form a coalition to create a blockchain for loyalty with common business functions?
Yeah, well, that's a good question, because as we were working on the white paper for blockchain for hospitality, this issue came up, and I don't think it's more complicated than basically getting, I don't know, a half a dozen or a dozen leaders in the hospitality industry, possibly under the auspices of HTNG, to say, hey, you know, let's build a business case for the advantages of collaborating with a common infrastructure built on blockchain versus continuing to manage our own independent infrastructures for managing, you know, loyalty, and possibly each of us ending up on different blockchains, which then complicates the life for the airlines or the rent-a-car companies or anybody else who wants to do business with us. Maybe we should be collaborating around a blockchain for loyalty, much like the airlines take advantage of IATA for their telecommunications infrastructure and now reconciliation and settlement. And so I think it's just a matter of some leaders coming together and saying, hey, you know, we've got to study whether it's better to collaborate or go our own separate ways. And my feeling is they will come to the conclusion that collaboration is the most cost-effective and customer-friendly approach, because it'll promote more collaboration in the industry. And then it's a matter of defining the governance model. Building the technology is not particularly complex. So really, it's just a matter of some people having the foresight to get ahead of this and define a common platform and approach, rather than just everybody going their own separate way and then finding out much later that, oh my God, we've really screwed this up.
Wow. Well, I think we have time for just one more question, and this one may be best directed at Juan. So Juan, how does a blockchain agnostic platform managing authentication and smart contracts actually work across blockchains? Is that a question that you can answer in a minute or two? If not, maybe this is something that we could explore further in our subsequent webinar as we do a deep dive with you all, and also some of the other deep dive webinars that we have upcoming.
What I can do is I'll give a teaser to that answer, and then we can explore it in more detail in the future, right? So basically, as we mentioned through the talk, we foresee that many implementations of blockchain will come up for loyalty, right? Because different consortiums and different partners will create their ecosystems. So we need to enable these enterprises to access and manage their activity in all of these blockchains, but it is just not scalable to do so in vertical silos of integration. So what we've done at Finboot is we've created that single access to manage multiple blockchain environments, right? So with your unique identity through the Markup platform, you're able to access different implementations and different technologies of distributed ledgers. And this opens the door to that agnostic blockchain ecosystem, right? Which essentially what it means is I can come in through a single door through a world of implementations, different partners, and for different applications.
All right, well, that's a good teaser. We'll definitely have to explore that further in a subsequent webinar. And I want to remind everyone that we do have 2 upcoming webinars. Those will be recorded and available on htng.org as well. Next week, we will have an exploration of the use case around distribution. It'll be at the same time on Monday, December 17th. And then for our final webinar this year, we'll be exploring how blockchain works, again on Monday, same time, December the 20th. So again, I want to thank Chuck and Juan for this well-constructed and informative presentation on the loyalty use cases for blockchain. We look forward to seeing you all in our upcoming episodes for this series of blockchain webinars. And don't forget to register for the webinar at htng.org/webinars. On that page, you will also find all past webinars listed, You're welcome to review this recording and the other episodes of this webinar series. You probably know a few people who weren't able to make today's live webinar presentation, and you're encouraged to direct your colleagues to access the recording from that site. And if you have any questions or feedback, you can direct those to workgroups@htng.org. So thank you all for your time today.